Now, in reality, I mean, actually, just glancing around to the things you're writing down, thank God, the things I was going to talk about, I've chosen to focus on this afternoon. I'll certainly include amongst things you're writing down. In fact, it's clear that you've given this issue a bit of painful thought already, which is fine. In reality, in your school, it may well be that you come into a situation where, as a department, you're expected to come up with your department response to a school's chosen whole school focus for literacy. And that can be very powerful, a very good thing. On the other hand, in some ways even more powerful can be where you think, well, actually, it might be different for different subject areas. We ought to sit down as a department and work out for ourselves which are the things which impact most negatively on students' outcomes. In other words, those things are real barriers to their success in science. Sometimes people get the message that literacy in a subject area, take science, is largely about improving students' literacy. I take the view that if you take on the responsibility for literacy in your subject area, which you're wise to do, whether that's successful or not is not whether students become more literate, it's whether they become better at your subject. So the only reason for improving students' literacy in science lessons is that they will get better at science, not they'll get better at literacy. And I think that's a really important message. But it does mean that it may well be that there are particular things which are of issues in science, which may be less so in other subject areas, possibly. Whatever the case, you've begun to write down particular issues. And I think if you're going to focus on things, it's best to focus on the things which are going to make the biggest difference to students in science. So, what I'd like you to do is, if I just show this to you, well, no, I can show you on here. Okay. This is a way forward that I've always liked. You can look at the particular problems in a number of dimensions, but it's interesting to look at these two dimensions, which is how important is that issue? In other words, how important is it because it has a direct impact on students' progress in the subject, here science. It could be unimportant. Students might be very weak in a particular literacy area, maybe even one of the ones you put down on the table, but in fact, when you think about it, it might be very unimportant, in the sense that it's unlikely to have much impact on your students' progress in the subject. So what I'd like you to do is to choose each one in turn of your stickers and see if you and your partner can come to an agreement where you would place it on this, what I call a quadrant. So sometimes you might find something you think, well, okay, so that thing, let's take spelling, for example. You might think, oh, spelling, tell me about it. Students can never spell, oh, it's so terrible, they're so weak at that. But you and your partner might decide, oh, how important is that though, really, spelling? And some partners might think, not actually very important. And some might think, actually, it's very important for various reasons. Whatever you like. So I'd like you to go through each one of your stickers and use them. I suppose, in summary, my point is that if we are going to concentrate on literacy in a subject area where the content is quite heavy already, yes, it's a good idea. It's a good idea, though, in order to make that content more accessible so that students make more progress. But if we are going to concentrate, it's probably a good idea to prioritise. And it's probably best to prioritise those things which are likely to have the most effect, probably in the short term, actually, because we all want to have some payback quite quickly. I just wonder, what have we got? I suppose the area, if we have something which is right up here, that's likely to be a very good priority. So if I can ask each of the pairs, or go through some of the pairs at least, and just ask you, what have you got which is nearest to the top left? What have you got nearest to the top left? Over here. Yeah.
SAL.
Science
is an additional language.
Oh, I see, right, okay.
So power.
Science is an additional language.
Yeah, you talk about, because the kids have misconceptions that they don't know about. So power, they know what power means in English, and they think they know what it means in science.
Okay. So actually, that business of being aware of the difference between the ordinary use of the word and the science use of the word. Energy would be another good example, force, and so on. Yeah, okay, good.
We were saying sort of use of connectives and sort of creating arguments.
Right, okay.
I mean, kids are great at sort of, read a question and fact, but it's actually the higher order stuff is actually how do they connect those sort of unrelated words
Yes.
to create an argument.
And actually, saying the use of connectives, you're implying that it's a writing thing you're after there. And I think that one of the most important things about writing is that writing should be something which aids thinking. It should be something which rounds up thinking, clarifies thinking. If it doesn't do that, it's probably a good idea not to do the writing at all. In fact, the reason which I've half facetiously called this book Less Good Writing, which is an ambiguous title, is that what has always occurred to me is that there's a danger that if we go down the route of helping teachers, helping each other really, to improve writing in our subject areas, there's a real danger that we'll do more of it. Whereas I personally think we're probably doing too much already, and we probably need to do less of it, but make it better, the stuff we are doing better. So if we can focus on particular things which are likely to make that writing more productive, and also make the writing more purposeful, then that's a good thing. But let's ask someone else. What have you asked? The top left, the nearest to your top left. Anyone else like to suggest? Yeah.
Extended writing.
Yes. Yes. We talked about it.
Yeah.
We just talked about what we thought extended writing was. I think we agreed. I was worried you might think it had to be extended writing, had to be at least 6,000 words, but I think we agreed it's like at least 2 sentences. Yes. I think any extended writing where students have to chain some ideas, I think like the gentleman over here was talking about connectives and things, so anything which allows you to connect the writing up and to extend your thinking and make the writing worthwhile and coherent is probably a good thing. And that can actually be as little as a paragraph, really, in one section. Even that can be defeating. Anyone else want to suggest what's near the top left? Yes?
We had reading for understanding.
Yeah. Can you explain why that's so important?
Yeah, I did a little study with a group of kids, and we looked at their reading, and even some of them that appear to read really quite fluently do not understand what they're reading. No more than some of them that struggle reading aloud. And I think that's a really big problem, because if they don't understand what they're reading, they can't move forward.
That's right.
And it says something about how they're cognitive developments.
Yes. And it is a huge issue. And there are all sorts of things about this, because as you say, you can get those students who, even if you hear them read out loud, they appear to be reading it and making sense of it all the way through, but they couldn't answer a single question about it. But I think there are certain strategies there which are really important. Like one, I think it's finding a way of getting an in to the students' thinking. Are they thinking while they're reading? Are they deliberately making sense of what they're reading as they're reading? But do they have strategies for doing things? Like, for example, reading with a purpose. So if you want to make sure they're reading with understanding, perhaps give them a very explicit purpose and a limited purpose of that reading. Ask them to underline, for example, every piece of information which is about forces, effective forces, for example. The danger always, of course, of that sort of approach is that you get those kids who then, they're underlining, you can highlight, they highlight absolutely every word in the whole. There, I think it's a very good tactic there is to give them a particular thing to highlight, but always say, you can only highlight a certain number of words in total. And you can only highlight, say, 3 words at any given moment. Sorry, you're about to say.
So give them a blue tack arrow, and they've only got one of them, so they can only point to one word.
Right, okay. Anything you do which makes them make a very definite decision, and a limiting decision, is a good thing. I have often seen, I'm sure you've seen it, I've literally seen those students who are doing that exercise and their whole page is covered with a highlighter on the same colour. Think, well, what is the point of that? And they're not understanding, because the understanding is all those, and I'm not going to it this afternoon directly, but that whole business of DARTs, directed related activities related to text, which has been around for donkey's years, is really important. This idea of giving the students very particular purposes and very particular strategies for making sense of the texts in front of them. I mean, simple things like, for example, making sure that there might be a question which you want them to be able to answer, and you give them the question before they read the text, rather than ambushing them with the question later on. But it's a really important issue, that about reading for understanding. Yeah. Anything else?
I guess a bit contentious is I think it's the teacher, one of the issues I think is important and can be weak or strong is the teacher's own literacy skills, particularly from a science point of view.
Yeah, do you want to, I mean, people do have different levels of literacy skill. I mean, I remember when I was a head of English in the biggest school in, where the hell are we now? Yeah, Reading. I was head of English in the biggest comprehensive in Bristol. And I remember that it was a time of change. You know, there always is a time of change. But I remember this technology teacher saying to me, he was very much a metal basher. He'd been there, you know, he'd been there for 40 years. And I remember him saying to me one day, he was under pressure and he said, do you know, he said, really, I just can't write. He said, constantly I'm being under pressure for writing this report and that report. If someone would do that for me, I'd be happy again, actually. And it makes you realise sometimes people on the quiet will come up to you and say, I'm not sure my literacy skills are really up to it. And very recently, it's not the only time it's happened, but one school I went to, the head teacher said to me, I like the book, by the way, I really like the book. And he said, you know, in private, what we've done is we decided to buy a copy for every teacher. And there is something to be said for that. I don't know, is this not an issue we can really fix, is it? Really?
But it's an issue, yeah.
It's an issue, but it's
fixable.
it's not an easily fixable one, is it?
It's not quickly, but it's not, no.
Providing support is, people don't want to admit to it, it's a problem.
Yeah.
There's also specialist difficulties because I'm mainly a chemist, and as I say to, you know, we're trained almost like barristers. We use language in a very specific way, which biologists don't use, and the physicists don't use in quite the fancy way that we do. We just, it can be, it is or is not, is, you know, or it is likely or whatever, and it's, you know, it's no absolute, you know, we kind of play with things where the physicists will go down the absolute route a little bit more often, and the biologists will stick in the sort of like wherever they stick in the middle of the field. So they tend to be a little bit different with the language, so we found that when we got in our discussions.
Yeah.
So again, it's I've had a discussion today, but I don't know, they're not in the room, but something to do with renewable and non-renewable. It's I actually don't know what that means. You have to break it down to know what it means to be able to utilise it when you're talking about specific things.
But,
and, you know.
But one of the things is when schools have whole school literacy, sort of, you know, themes and whatever, it's very easy to forget that actually a lot of the teachers there aren't English specialists, and actually a lot of language coming out from the leader for the English initiative happens to be the head of English, who's a real expert in the field, and there's an expectation all teachers to be able to pick up on this. I think there's a real need to appreciate that some teachers, quite a lot of teachers, you know, do also need support in their own literacy skills to be able to, you know, to deliver the literacy requirements of the school.
But there's two levels, isn't there? There's the literacy skill, and then there's the science literacy skill, because with that is the implied knowledge of application of it, and that comes out when you start teaching A-level kids, because you start realising they come from this teacher, that teacher, very able students who go like, oh boy, you know, you've got a real problem here.
Okay. Well, this is such a huge issue. Let's move on. I mean, I think actually, obviously it's an issue. I think sometimes though some people have got very good literacy skills, they're very proud of them, but the skills they're proud of can be quite kind of, they're proud of their ability to spell very exactly and punctuate really well and very good grammar, and they look down on people who don't have those skills. Actually, sometimes the people they're looking down on, their skills are roughly there. Yeah, they're roughly all right. It's just a bit rough at the edges. I suppose there are some teachers though whose literacy skills are just not up to it at all, but it's generally the case. There's also in science, of course, the whole thing of leaving literacy aside, that, you know, if you're a physics teacher, actually it's not so much though, it's more if you're a biology teacher, and you're then expected to teach physics at GCSE. I think sometimes that can be an issue, can't it? Same as if you're a geography teacher and something you have to teach history at GCSE. There are areas like that where you have to step outside your own expertise and knowledge can be put under pressure. We'll leave that for the moment. Let's look at, so what you've done is look at some of the issues to do with that and how you might go through a process of deciding not just how weak students are and how irritating their weaknesses are, but also how important those weaknesses are and holding them back. I think it's worth thinking about the demands we place on students. Now, whatever your literacy skills are, who was a teacher, what I would assume, and I think it's a fair assumption, is that any literacy demand you place on students, you could meet yourself. I mean, that must be true, I guess. So if you set them a reading task, you know how to do that reading task. If you set them a writing task, you could do it. I don't just mean to say that you know the science to do it, but actually you could do that piece of writing. You know how to do it. But I think it's interesting to look at the literacy demands which are placed upon students quite, I wouldn't say casually exactly, but routinely in lessons. So one lesson, a science lesson I went to recently, would this be chemistry? Yeah. I was trying to remember, yes. I get confused about what sort of science lesson I'm in sometimes, but anyway. I picked out the 3 key points in the lesson. I just thought I'd share with you, where I thought some particular literacy demand had been posed upon students, or expected of students. And they were these 3. They were asked to work with a partner to agree on a definition of physical change. Different partners were working on different things. Others were working on other sorts of change, I guess, and things. I can't remember now. What might we do to control how quickly a change occurs was a question posed by the teacher, and then she said, I want to write down your thoughts on this. And the expectation was this be done quite quickly. It's probably the 2 sentences, I think, extended writing. Read the section on catalytic converters in the textbook and make notes on the key points. That might sound huge. At the time it seemed fairly reasonable, because in other words, it wasn't become as a complete surprise to them. This is sort of a summary of what they've learned really using the book. Could I just give you a couple of minutes to talk through what literacy skills are being required in each of these 3? What are the demands of those points? What literacy skills do the students have to have in order to meet those? Give you a couple of minutes to talk those through. Anyone want to begin here? I might well ask you to sort of join up and talk in 2 pairs, talk to 4. Or, if you were talking about in 3s originally, I'll get 1 member of your 3 to take your answers to the next 3 and so on. But since we're not in real life, I'll just get a quick bit of feedback. Did anyone have a suggestion about what the demands being posed by this?
That one, I was saying that we're kind of assuming they will write a definition that we would see in the dictionary, whereas actually they're probably going to be able to give examples, but actually forming that 1 sentence and a definition would be very difficult.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. They tend to respond to that thing, it's like when.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that, yes.
And
Of
when we
course,
read it, we're like, well, that's not a definition.
No, you're going for the example rather than, yeah, that's a good point, yeah. I hadn't noticed that before, yeah, that's true. What else?
And the thing is, a lot of physical change, they might relate to their own life's experience. Therefore, they might talk about, well, I was a child, now I know. And so
So that goes back to that point about the technical meaning and the ordinary meaning.
How well they've appreciated that the context is one of these examples on the page or that they've seen in today's lesson. So I find framing it with, from what we've done today or from the practical you just did, give an example of, or how does that help you define?
Okay.
We were saying in terms of vocab, the fact that a definition has to describe something without using that word. So they've got to have a bank of words they can use to describe it.
Yes.
Rather than just
Yes. One of the things I found about definitions from students, I mean, I'm not in science here really, but anything you ask me to define, the definitions tend to be very vague, using lots of very vague language, particularly using, well, things like, and also lots of pronouns, it, and you think, I'm not quite sure what you're saying here. And they do need those other words, don't they?
Well, you need to scaffold it with them with those key words, and let's get that idea of actually how those key words are linked together to come up with a definition of physical change. Yeah.
So I certainly wouldn't suggest to you that every single time you identify what the literacy demand of a task is going to be, you then teach that particular literacy skill. You will do sometimes, though. But I think, but bearing in mind what the skill is, what the demand is, I think is a really good way forward, because it helps you to prompt the right sort of answers, doesn't it? The right answers, but the right useful answers. Yes.
I mean, the problem with definitions are that you straight away you're into higher order thinking skills, because you straight away into the abstract, because you come away from the concrete and you're expecting students to apply a generic description to a concrete thing. So they're better off with you know, asking students to start with a stepwise effectiveness assessment plan. Could you describe a physical change?
Right, okay.
Could you describe another physical change? Now,
Yes.
can you give a general definition of a physical change? Because that's what you're asking to do. So you're asking to go through 2 cognitive steps,
Yes.
and people think that's a straightforward thing to do. It's not.
Yeah, that sounds
It's
quite...
actually on a
Specifics
Bloom's
then generalised.
taxonomy scale. You're
Yeah.
actually on the 6th area.
Yes.
You know.
Because it does depend upon when you ask the question, doesn't it, the task? Because if you've already, if it's a summarising...
Yeah,
of
if
the-
they've known it
yeah,
already,
that's right.
then-
But I take your point, yeah, good point. But very quickly, so for example, what might we do to control how quickly a change occurs? It was, quickly write down your thoughts on that. Any thoughts about the challenges there? Yeah.
A lot of lower ability pupils in particular, they could tell you, they could say everything they're thinking, but actually getting the words onto the page
Yeah.
is very difficult.
That's right, yeah. It is very difficult, yeah, and so you're quite right. I do wonder this, because sometimes if kids, okay, if kids can't write it down, very often it's because they haven't really understood it, isn't it, to be honest, as well. But I take your point, yeah. Anything else on this one, quickly? That's a good point.
You're making an assumption they're going to go to the right kind of change you're talking about. It's
Yes,
But
yes.
they're not going to go to chemical change all of a sudden because they, like you said,
I
change
didn't
of
talk
any
about
kind.
that before, yes, yeah. good
Because
business.
I mean, although it says physical in the first, the teacher's obviously thinking physical, my natural bent is to go straight to chemical change when you talk about change. Because the first thing you've been teaching them and drumming them and drilling them is about rates of reaction. So they'll be going down the collide collisions and all the rest of it, which is kind of similar in the sort of area, but then they're not really going down the physical side.
Yeah,
So you've got misconceptions going to
misconceptions, and that's
start
really important.
building on
yeah,
them if you're not
that's right.
careful.
Okay, and that's the thing about misconceptions, they get worse, they get
Mm,
deeper.
mm.
Read a section on catalytic converters in the textbook and make notes on the key points.
How do you know what the key points are?
Mhm.
You
Yes.
not at least twice.
I'd give
to be able
boundaries.
to understand the key points.
Yeah.
A text is.
Yes.
Kids can't make notes.
Well, wait,
They
the
can't
thing
make
is,
notes.
yeah,
No,
all
they
they do is
can't.
they just copy.
They just copy, yeah.
So there's
Okay.
a whole skill in saying writing the note taking.
Again, you're asking them to go straight from what you want them to do is actually high level order. What they need is a stage in between in which they
Yes.
would be able to physically actually highlight on the text
Yeah.
as something. So it's better to actually maybe have a small, that they print it into the books,
Yeah,
glue it into the book, and actually just highlight the little bits and then
Yes.
summarise it
Yes.
down.
that's
So
right.
you're actually asking for Tracy, and if you remember
Yes.
Tracy back if you were an O-level student, like me back in the 1960s, 70s, then you're going to remember that was actually quite a high-level thing for you to be
Yeah.
doing.
It is.
Yeah, we expect kids to just do that.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
And you're right, they'll just copy it out or just
Mhm,
highlight a
yeah.
whole lot or something. But highlighting a bit for a particular aspect could be a good thing. Actually, to be honest, I mean, it seems very bald like this. I mean, I promise you, when I was there, it all seemed quite reasonable, seemed fair enough. It was only that point that I actually did gulp a bit, because it was about make notes, and I thought, oh, what's that going to look like? You know, because you know how kids' notes look like. But I think that probably for me would be the area if I was, you know, the teacher. I think that if I knew I was going to ask for that, I would know that I would need to be very clear about what I mean by making notes and what I'd expect to come out of that. And I think in relation to that, I can make a point which I would like to make as a big point this afternoon, which is essentially, if you could do the things, assuming you can do the things you're going to set to kids, you need to be able to show them how to do it. And I think that what teachers in all subject areas, including English, are reluctant to do is to live demonstrate the very skill which we ask students to do. And I think at some point, at least at some point, we know students can't make notes. It's one of the many things they can't do. But if we want them to make notes in order, because that's quite an efficient way of learning, and it could, you know, we don't then have to tell them everything, actually, we need to teach them and show them what note making looks like. How often does that happen? I mean, I think it almost never happens in any schools that anyone really shows them, takes through the process of making notes. And that's where I might think, actually, I think most teachers, if faced with it, may not know what making notes would really involve. I'm going to take one more comment on this before we move on. So, okay, well, that's very good of you. Yes, so it's over to you.
And again, assuming that just because we did it in September, that just like graph
Yes.
drawing, we
Yes.
come back to it and
Yes.
they cannot do it, we
Yes.
need to...
Having said that, if you have done it once and you've done it really well, then you've got a secure base to refer back to say, now remember when we. But you know, most of the time, Remember we did that, it was yesterday. Got no chance. Right, so 4 areas I'm going to very quickly say some things about. Vocabulary, spelling and meanings, and spelling is the most important thing here, thing I want to just look at. It's not, I think spelling can be important, because especially in a place, an area like science, it is quite possible for weak spellers to misspell very high percentages of the subject words. That's possible, isn't it? Yeah. Very high percentages. If they're misspelling them so that readers will understand easily what they mean, that's not as bad as when they write the word and we really don't know what they mean. But I mean, let's face it. I mean, we do change spellings. Sulphur, most people, it says dangerously, now spell it with an F. No. Really, most people reluctantly spell it with an F. But actually, PH would be considered spelling until very recently.
I will change the way I say that when they start calling it aluminium.
Oh, I see. Okay, fair enough. Right. But spelling can be an issue, and I think with something like science, it can be very important. So what I'm going to ask first of all is, Emma, could we get copies round? If you have picked up a copy of this at any point anywhere, then get it out. But if you haven't, I think we'll have copies coming round. Could I consider spelling like this first of all? If you look at page 4, better spelling.
Another one.
There are ways. Okay, good. There are ways of improving student spelling. Students' spelling is very difficult to improve. I mean, that's another reason why spending lots of time on spelling can be quite frustrating, because it doesn't seem to have very much impact. In fact, the students who spell well didn't become good spellers because they spent lots of time learning how to spell, unfortunately. They seem to learn to spell well through some mysterious process. However, there are ways, if you're going to spend some time on spelling, it's better to give students some strategies for improving their own spelling. And one of the things is that most students do know that there's what's called a sound-symbol correspondence. In other words, certain clusters of letters are likely to make certain sounds. And you can turn it around. If they know how to say the word, what you often find is that students are misspelling the word, but they can say it correctly, but they are missing out parts of it. So I try to train students to some extent in saying particular words, important words in the subject area, saying them slowly and clearly, and then as they go through, they try to write down each of the sounds, or put them in pairs, so that one of them says the word reliably, slowly and clearly, and the other one writes it down, making sure they include all the sounds. So sounding it out can be a very good one. Breaking it down and sounding it out. That breaking it down can be done into syllables. You can hear, the word science, for example, has 2 syllables. Science. Kids aren't going to get that wrong. They'll probably tell you it's got 2 syllables. But if you go for something like photosynthesis, most kids will, if they think about it, tell you how many syllables there are in photosynthesis. We think 5. But if they're only representing 4 of those syllables in their spelling, that's a good starting point. Rather than just telling them how to spell it now, say to them, look, you haven't got all the syllables represented there. Can you say it again very carefully, identify the 5 syllables, and make sure you've got some letters in for each of those syllables. I think in the long run, it's quite good to get students to live with the regularities of spelling as much as they possibly can. The word science, interestingly, science has got 3 sounds. Scotland hasn't. Science, it's got 4 sounds. It's got 2 syllables, but it's got 4 sounds. Students are taught from an early age nowadays to break words down into their sounds and then try to find a way of representing each of those sounds in the spelling. Now, most students have gone through the training, and you can get them to rework it. So, again, try to get them to say how many sounds are in that word. Have you made all those sounds in the letters you put down there? We're too quick to spell it for them, or just to rely upon put SP next to a word in the margin, and they start to use us as proofreaders, whereas they should be doing it themselves to a large extent. Memory tricks. I mean, there are memory tricks you can play all the time. Like, you know, I know science teachers who often, because many students can't get, they have problems with the silent letters. Like the word science, has this C which shouldn't be there. But to always refer to it as science, for example, is irritating, but over time, at least it does make it quite clear to students that there is a C after the S. You teachers say, I'll see you on Wednesday. Whereas, of course, usually we don't put that, do you? We just go straight to the Wednesday. But you can humorously sound out the words. That can be a memory trick. But you can have other memory tricks where you have the word necessary, for example. And I never understand how this works, but some people say it's necessary for a shirt to have one collar and 2 sleeves. And it's a C and 2 S's. How you get from a shirt to the word necessary, I don't know, but some people swear by it because big elephants can't always use small exits. These are memory tricks. I sometimes think the trick is more complicated than the spelling itself, but you can play. And if you get students to invent their own memory tricks, they'll come up with a memory trick, a mnemonic as it's called, which will work for them. All these things are ways of avoiding simply building helplessness in the students, where either they don't care about their spelling, or they just use you as a proofreader. Look, say cover right check is an obvious one. There are some words where you just think, well, look, just look at it carefully, say it out loud, cover it up, write it next to it. If you've got it right, fine. If it's wrong, do it again. Go through the process again. Saying it like it is things like Wednesday and science and so on. Now, in here, my idea is that I thought it's a good idea to give students strategies all the time where they can actually try to improve their own literacy rather than relying upon you to do it for them. Because effectively you can't do that. You've got too much else to be doing. So if you can have something to support you in doing that, that's great. And it's about building student independence too, isn't it? They don't become helpers. Many people say things like, having a strategy or an ethos of try 3 before me. The students can't ask you anything and you say to them, what are the 3 things you've already done to get that, to find out. And a teacher said to me, I don't do that, I do try 5 if you want to stay alive. But however many it is, that's fine. But I think we do need to get students to become more. They can do things to use their own learning in order to use their own learning before they ask. But they like the helplessness option, really, don't they? Too often. So spelling strategies. Use strategies. Don't just tell them to learn the word. Don't just tell them to write the word out loads of times. Don't just tell them to learn it. Get them to decide how to learn it. And if we were to, just very quickly, could I just get you, again, probably in pairs, to talk about, if you were to just choose a couple of these words over here, doesn't matter which ones, but then say to yourselves, actually, which strategies, if I said to a kid, a kid says, I don't know how to spell energy, and I say, well, okay, how do you think you spell it? That's a good starting point. And I might say to them, sound it out. And we go, N, G. And actually, I did this recently, and the kids spelled it E-N, how do you spell it? E-N-U-R-G-E. And I thought, well, actually, that's better than nothing. Better than nothing, I can probably recognise it. It's not great. But sounding it out was good because at least it gave them a start into it. There might be all sorts of things. Finding the stem word is about, actually, this is quite important because so many science words, of course, they have the same bits which move around. We keep reusing it. Now, if kids know what that stem means, if they know the stem or the affix, the bit fixed on, means, that's quite useful. Photo, if they know that it means light, that's actually quite helpful, isn't it? Because it gives them all sorts of photosynthesis, photograph. If they know that ology means study, and bio means life. This is really useful, isn't it? So actually, they might recognise, oh, all right, okay, so I know what those stems are. I can now spell those properly. Can I just get you just to give it a couple of minutes so I can shut up for a moment? Talk to each other. Just choose a couple of these words. Obviously not energy. A couple of the others, and just talk about which particular strategy you think would be useful for suggesting to the student about learning STEM. Starting by asking you what you thought your concerns were, and I thought I ought to show you a lesson I saw recently and asking you what you think about the literacy demands were. I did think at the time, that's going to take quite a bit of time, so, but I'll skim through a few things. So, spelling, yes. Think about the strategies available. The book will help. Think about prompting students to use a particular strategy. Trying to get them to use strategies which are likely to be productive for them.